Welcome back to Beyond the Quo, where we break boundaries, redefine success, and explore authentic leadership and personal transformation. I'm your host, Stacey Luces, and today we're diving into a conversation that is sure, well, hopefully, to leave you inspired and entertained. Joining me is someone who truly goes beyond the quo in every sense of the word. He is America's #1 dating enthusiast, the creative force behind the Great Love Debate, a nationally touring series of live shows that challenges the way that we not only think about love, but really make probably some new integrations about it, connection, and relationships. He is also the CEO of the amazing PodPopuli, for which, I am thankful for. You take a lot of the hard work off of it for me, which is a community-driven podcasting platform helping people share their stories and amplify their voices. Please welcome to the show, Howie. Brian, it's such a pleasure to have you today.
That was a pretty good intro.
Thank you.
Wow. I'm like, who's that? Oh, it's just me. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. So the Great Love Debate, that was probably my first introduction to you.
Yep.
Well, outside of the Boca Chamber where we met, but definitely once I Googled it and started getting more interested in podcasting, it was because of some of the stuff that you shared during that kind of info session. But the thing for me, and I think you just mentioned it before we started, was the storytelling piece. And I think I want to talk a little bit about, in terms of, for folks listening, how that arc from you being in the industry that you were in to having your own podcast, to doing live shows, and now to helping folks like myself have the sort of courage to sit here and really do their own podcast. What's that arc been like?
It's a pretty reasonable arc. I think I kind of know the arc in my head. People are like, how'd you go from there to there? When I went to college, I wanted to be a writer. I wanted to write the great American novel, and I did not have the talent for that. So I started to write screenplays, and no offense to screenwriters out there, but screenplay, you can write 120 pages instead of 400, and instead of describing a sunset, you just say morning. Yeah. And eventually I started to write, direct, produce theater, television, film, commercials, all kinds of things, and I noticed somewhere along the line that almost all of my passion and curiosity in things that I was creating about was between the dynamic between men and women. And I felt like it was always the one thing that nobody has all the answers to. Yeah. We all have questions about, we all have experience with, we all have pain from, we all have hope for. All of it sort of is about this dynamic and hopefully love and relationships. So I had a little break in what I was doing. It's like a film thing that got delayed, and I wrote a semi-tongue-in-cheek book on dating called How to Find Love in 60 Seconds. And it really wasn't about a quickie. It was more about finding opportunities and recognizing them and knowing that there's these sort of windows of time where magic can happen. And I wrote this book, and my agent at the time said that rather than do a standard book tour with 20 people in a Barnes & Noble, why don't you raise some of the questions that the book raised in sort of a town hall style, theater setting. So we were supposed to do one of these as a publicity stunt, January 10th, 2014 in Santa Barbara, California. Wow. I didn't even host it because I didn't feel like, quote unquote, I was the talent then. It went over crazy, big, and then somebody called me from somewhere else. And then I started sort of barnstorming these live shows all around the country. And then about a year into that, Adam Carolla, who's a pretty famous podcaster, came to me and said, how come you don't have a podcast? And I'm like, I don't know how to do a podcast. And
isn't that what we all say?
Yeah, and he goes, come into my studio and we'll take the hard parts out of it and we'll make you a podcaster. Well, he did that for me. I really liked the medium. And I realized that podcasting really is giving people the opportunity to share their voice and their message and reach an audience. And I thought, this is something I've always been doing in different formats. I've always tried to give people a voice, and I didn't quite have the confidence to ever make my own voice the one, so I would hide it behind characters and parts and all that. And then once I finally, reached, I don't know, I'm in my 40s at this point doing this, and I'm like, I really liked the freedom of podcasting. I really liked the way it could resonate. And so I started my own podcast, or he started my own podcast. And then people were like, oh, that seemed fun. Can you help me? And then I did a couple more people and some celebrities. And I was in Santa Monica, California, a little studio there. And then I'm like, how many people could be podcasters if we gave them a place to do it?
For sure.
And took and gave them some sort of expertise in it. And I was like, there's a lot of people who have stories to tell. So I guess it started from me not being a very good writer to let's talk it through and going from there. But it all is just, sharing a message, I think.
So I think a parallel for me that struck me, I wrote a book a couple months ago, and one of the things I talked about is having these identities at work and at home, and even with your friends, and not really showing up as your full and authentic self. And I think when you were talking just now about writing and sort of being able through the characters to say what you maybe would not have said in person,
right.
That's what came up for me. Was we sit at these boardroom tables and we perform, we're performative. And it gets to a point where I want to say in your 40s, for everybody, all of the work that I've done, it's probably midlife, which late 30s, 40s, where you're kind of sick of the performative and you want to get down to your real truth. And I like what you said about this giving people a medium by which to do that. But how have you seen people flounder at this and succeed when they show up for themselves as their true self? Because you can perform here too, right?
Totally. A lot of people, some of our worst podcasters, and I don't like to use that term, but they have come from a news or journalistic background.
Wow.
Where they are hiding behind, they're narrating. Yes. They're not being vulnerable. They're not being authentic. A good podcast means that somebody doesn't just listen to it and think that's you. They need to listen to you and think that's me. She shares my perspective. She shares my interest. She shares my curiosity. That's hard for a journalist because you're not supposed to be part of the story.
For sure.
As a podcaster, you need to be part of the story. And it takes a long time. We kind of find our way through our 20s and 30s and whatever, and you find
stumbling.
You find yourself in your 40s.
Yes.
That's really the decade when, and there's a biological reason for that, because a lot of the focus early on, I had some doctors on my podcast who told me this. So much of the focus in your teens, 20s, 30s is about family and bonding and whatever, and either you've gone through that or you've gotten away from that. Now it's time to focus on me.
Yeah.
And our more successful podcasters are not necessarily the cocky 25-year-olds. They're the people who have life experiences and perspective and whatever, and they make our successful ones. The people who really understand these are conversations that I enjoy having. I want to have them every day, and I believe that I can have dialogue that can resonate. And that's what makes a successful podcast, is that the listener feels like they're a part of a conversation.
Yeah.
They feel like they're sitting right next to us.
Yeah. I want to pull the thread on something you said about kind of being defined by the dynamic between masculine, feminine, and love, right? And I want to broadcast back to kind of people in their real lives loving and hating, like relationships overall, and the masculine feminine dynamic. So my background is I worked in a lot of male dominated industries. So ex-military, Pentagon, like real brass knuckles, wearing a gray suit or a blue, right, or a black. Pick your suit. I think for a lot of women in their 40s, and before I started my coaching business, I used to do personal styling and branding 7 years ago. So I've met hundreds of women and been privy to a lot of conversations around dating and apps.
Yeah.
And I guess, what are your thoughts on the way that you show up in a relationship? Whether you're insecure or narcissistic or needy or whatever, or confident or assertive, I feel like those play out in different relationships in our lives. And we're not aware that we're kind of in a pattern and manifesting the same shit over and over and over again.
I agree. People always, I always tell people to get rid of the words "not my type."
Right.
If you're over 30 and you're still single, you have no type. Your type's not working out for you. And what I mean by that is
Change
like your answers tend to lie outside of your comfort zone. And if you're repeating patterns and things that people tend to do when they go into a new relationship is either lead with their own publicist for the first 90 days. You're scared to show your authentic self, or you are bringing so much baggage from your previous existence that the new person doesn't have a fair shot. They don't have a fair shot to be judged on who they are, because everything is either, I say the women look for red flags and the men look for green lights. That's a little bit true, and neither of those is right.
Yeah.
You shouldn't only be looking at the good in her, you should only be looking for the bad in him. And a lot of times we are not going into relationships authentically because we have not gone into ourselves authentically. Yeah. And you got to do the work. When you go to therapy, and which I really started to do intently, not until my 40s. And that takes finding a relationship. Finding a relationship with a therapist is no picnic either.
For sure.
You're picking up that rock.
That's one of the most important relationships you'll have.
It is. And I used to go to therapists hoping that I would sufficiently charm them so they would be like, why are you even here? You don't need therapy. Like, I want them to tell me I was fine. And finally, I found some therapist who's so far out on the fringes that I'm like, I can trust her with anything.
You out on the BS.
Totally. She was like a therapist. She's a shaman. I travel to see her. Like, she's amazing for me. Most people are like, oh my God, I can't talk. And she was saying, like, you have to pick up that rock and see what's under it. And there's a lot of terrible, and when you let the sun shine on the rock, like, there's still a lot of bugs and worms and dirt and all that. And you have to be willing to go there. And credit to most people, therapy is more mainstream than it has ever been. I think more men are going to therapy. What I didn't realize was that we're taught as men to be strong and hide our weakness and all that, but really vulnerability comes off as honesty, especially to women, and they like that. They're like, I know that you're screwed up. I care that you know that you're screwed up. And owning that really goes a long way in forming a bond of trust and sharing and honesty and authenticity that a lot of us are afraid to do because we're doing this dance like who's going to screw up first.
So a perspective I have is you were saying men are taught to be strong and assertive and not show vulnerability. We have to hide sometimes just how much masculine energy and assertiveness we really have and pretend to be vulnerable and oh my goodness, and I see it in dating and in relationships, even now where these freaking alpha females really dilute their essence and their authenticity to meet the ego needs of the partner.
I agree. The ballsiest people I know are women. And a lot of times I do believe that there's a direct correlation. And a lot of women get mad I say this, but they don't say I'm not right. The rise of the independent woman has disproportionately affected the happiness of the women because they need the men less, and there's no doubt that you need us less. This blurring of traditional gender roles has really screwed up 2 generations of daters because people don't know how to act, behave. A lot of women are offended if you hold the door. And that's tough on men. They're like, what am I supposed to do here?
I'm going to caveat that.
Yep.
I'm going to say that what I needed, so I've been married for almost 22 years, known him for 30. We've grown up together. And as I have matured, as I have come into my own, as I have stepped into different spotlights, I need different things from him. And he needs different things from me. And I will say that it takes a certain degree of courage and humility and fucking grace to say, I need different things. I think sometimes we have changed and we don't express what we need in this new season of this relationship. And so expectations go unmet. The man feels inadequate because there are times when I was the breadwinner and so forth. And it affected him in ways he wasn't taught. And that's a weird word, but he didn't have a model for how to express the way that he felt. And I couldn't meet him and he couldn't meet me where we were in the rocky times.
Well, you use the key word there, and the word is need. We, as men, need to be needed.
For sure. 100%.
And a lot of women are saying, no, it's about want, not need. No, it's not. I want world peace. I need tater tots. Like, which one sounds more passionate to me?
Tater tots.
Need matters. And we hear all the time from women, I don't need a man, I don't need this, and when they say that, then they're like, well, there's no place for me in your world that's going to make it better.
Yeah.
And I tell women, just stop. I know it's probably true. You don't need us.
Yeah.
You can buy your own shit. You can fix your own shit. You don't even need a ride, nothing. But keep it to yourself. Like, just let us sometimes be the boy that we're kind of, sociologically we have changed. Yes. Physiologically, we are still wired the way we always were.
Yeah.
And sometimes he's like, can I just get that for you? Can I just do that for you? And there aren't a lot of ways that we get to do that.
Can I tell you a physical manifestation of that I saw recently? So we went salsa dancing.
Yeah.
We went to a dance class. And when we were younger, we're from the Caribbean. We could dance with the best of them, right? During this salsa class, and I had to really freaking go deep about why this happened. We were switching partners. When I was with him, we were arguing about who was leading who. Like he would say to me, just let me lead. And then when I was with these other guys, some of them, okay, a little bit wimpy, but it's like my dominance came to play with this person that is my safe harbor. And I couldn't understand why. So I totally had to have a moment with myself, but I feel like you're right. Like he is my safe harbor and I do need him for things that I can't give to myself. My parents can't give it to me. My girlfriends, whom I love very much, can't. My kids can. But it took me a long time to even confess that to myself because it was a little bit in contrast to me being...
Right. You know, and all of it's about self-preservation. If I need this person to survive, then what? You know, we don't want to feel that way. We want to need them on a positive thing. Like need is almost like, how can you enhance me? How can you bring benefit to me? And there's ways to say this in a more positive fashion. You know, we give each other a lot of smacks on the nose. We don't give each other a lot of pats on the nose. And there's a lot of ways to give sort of positive encouragement at work. And, you know, I've gotten better at that. I used to be the worst. I would really only talk to the people who worked with me or for me, like when something went wrong. Or I wouldn't say anything. It's like sort of don't pay much attention to the good child.
Make me walk outside and do a poll here, Brian.
Yeah.
See if you're polling. So tell me how this manifests in partnerships. This all of this baggage we're bringing into I'm assuming a romantic relationship, but outside of that, into the platonic, professional, where trust has to be mega high. If you're doing huge deals and you have mommy or daddy issues that manifest in your romantic lack or abundance or starvation. Right. How does this affect being authentic, leading courageously, making money?
What's the question?
The question is all of this baggage that is very evidence-based in your romantic relationships that you're not going to change yourself inherently and show up differently for professional relationships.
You wouldn't think. Some people do. Some people have the capabilities of doing that.
Is it sustainable though?
No, I don't think so. I mean, I think everything comes down to confidence and communication. And that is not just confidence, like expressing your confidence to other people. It's being confident in who you are and what you can do, and also confident in what you can and cannot do. And a lot of times we cover that up because we're afraid of that. And we cover that up in noise and bluster and attitude and all that. You know, I always tell people, life is improv, and you should take an improv class, especially when you're in sales. Like that's not just for actors. It's like, how do I come up in a moment and deal with that? And so how you communicate at home with your partner, a lot of times that is how do you communicate with your staff, with your colleagues, with your clients. And, you know, you have to determine sometimes, am I treating them like a friend? Am I treating them like I would talk to my spouse? Am I treating them with, do I have a completely different personality altogether? I don't know. One of the greatest compliments I get and one of the biggest insults I get as a podcaster is people tell me that the podcast version of me is more authentic.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm like, how would you take that? Good or bad? I take that good as a podcast because they're like, I think you feel the protection of the microphone filtering through. And I'm like, really? And people say, I feel I know you so much better from listening to your podcast and I've known you for 20 years. And I'm like, is it about what I'm talking about? It's like, no, the way you talk about it. And so you're trying to, you know, have confidence in your product, your company, your abilities, your skills, in your professional life. And hopefully you have that same confidence in your skills and all that stuff at home or in your romantic life. It's hard sometimes to, and that's why sometimes when things are not going well at home, I know, especially with people who work for us, we're not supposed to ask that. And it's always bad. I'm like, oh, he was in a bad mood. He must be fighting with his girlfriend. Like that's where my mind goes.
Yeah.
And maybe they're mad at me.
I want to say that that's changing. In the sense of, and I think post this awkward pandemic where half of the people were wearing pajamas from the bottom and like a nice shirt and makeup on the top,
right?
Me included,
right?
And your kids were running in with their, I'm sure we've all seen that viral video with this, right? The minister of whatever and the kid in the stroller. I feel like the lines, not that they've blurred, but it has become okay to ask, hey, time out. What's happening? Like, help me understand what's happening. The leader that changed me, I wouldn't say the most, was an older guy. His name was Jerry. I still remember his name, and I'm so bad at names. Every morning he had a stand up. So he brought the team together, 5 minutes, and he said, "What do you want to do today? Like, what do you hope to accomplish? What are 3 things in your way that I can help you with? And is there anything going on personally with you that we need to know so that we can have your back?"
Right.
And I was a new mom, and there was shit going on, right? And at first, everybody was real awkward because you don't want to spill your business and like have everybody judge the fact that you weren't performing.
Right.
But as the weeks went on, it built such a cohesive team that it has probably been one of my favorite teams ever in my life. And I took the lessons that Jerry sort of seeded and brought that into kind of my life now. But tell me about, as a leader, as a CEO of this company, as when Brian calls, everybody listens. What is the kind of legacy that you're hoping to leave? Let's say you've got a 15, 20 year runway in front of you, building on what you've done in the past.
We built a community.
Yeah.
I really like the word. I think especially at this company, PodPopuli, we're trying to build a community between our team and the podcasters. We're trying to build a community between all the podcasters, and we're trying to build a community between the podcasters and their audiences, and collectively share, grow, encourage, believe. And a lot of times it's a lot easier to find somebody to love you than find somebody to believe in you.
I love that.
And nobody truly believed in me. There's 2 people who changed my life by believing in me. And I was well into my career.
Yeah.
Most times, especially in the entertainment business, people were like, what can he do for me? What can this person do? I mean, I spent most of my career in New York and LA. These are not authentic places. Yeah. These are people who are like, can I use him for something? But somewhere, you
could see the wheels turning in the back.
10 years ago,
Yeah.
2 people within 4 months of each other believed in me in a way that not only nobody else had, but I didn't even believe in myself. Changed my life. I have since been that person to another person.
I love that.
And I was like, and she says that all the time. It's like nobody ever believed in me, and it just changed everything for her. And I remember that feeling for me. And I'm like, we try so hard to get the love, but even the person who loves you might not believe in you on a level you need them to. And when that changes things for you, it means if that person who either knows me well or doesn't know me at all believes in me, well, what's my excuse? And that really was the most important lesson that I've learned, that nobody ever said out loud to me before, who believes in you. And for me, and check out one of my other podcasts, I don't believe I had that from my family in a way I wanted. They discouraged me from being a creative type. They thought it was a waste of my smarts. And so I always felt everything I did professionally was a retaliation to what I did not get personally in my childhood.
I really love that.
Well, I don't love it. It's not good.
Well, I love the lesson, right? Because I think and I'll speak, as a middle-aged woman with kids who has her own from my perspective, one of the things that I was very anti was the housewife. I didn't learn to cook. I became hyper successful. Anything that took me away from the traditional roles that I saw growing up, kind of like you, that inner rebel, I pursued actively. I want to bring it back to what we were talking about. What did one of your, and I'm going to say mentors, right? What did they see in you that called forth a different part of you?
Why don't you have the microphone? What is wrong? Like, why are you pretending that you don't have anything to say? Why is your voice not strong enough? Why don't you believe in the things that you have to hey, or you take the mic and say things that I believe. Yeah. I used to get a kick. I wrote a lot of theater, and I would sit in the back of the theater and I would write a line in the play or whatever that it's one thing to write a line that people laugh at. A lot of people can do that. And then it's another thing to write something that people think at. And when you hear the brains thinking, that is quite a rush. Well, why can't I say the things and make people, why am I so afraid of that? Yeah. Why am I always afraid of saying something that will elicit thought? And I was never afraid of saying something to make people laugh or angry, get a tangible reaction. But thought is sometimes silent. They got me to understand that thought is not silent. and thought is something that can resonate deeper with you if you understand the impression you're making. So both of these people in one way or another were, one, taught me to take control of my own voice, and two, taught me to believe that what I had, like, it was time in my life to stand up and say the things I wanted to say. I always wanted a forum for my thoughts. It was just time to stop filtering it, and that belief in myself. Like, I remember she was a big producer in LA, and she took me to lunch, and she's like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "What are you talking about? I'm not that guy."
Yeah.
And she gave me a list of journalists who started out behind the camera. You know, everybody from, Katie Couric was like lugging camera equipment. She's like, she wasn't on air. And eventually somebody's like, get out in front, take that. And so I've tried to do that for other people. A lot of people come to do a podcast and are like, who can host my show? And they're like, well, you can. And they're like, well, I can't do that. I'm like, have you ever had a conversation before?
Yeah.
They're like, of course. Then you can have a show. And when you treat everything in some way like a conversation, and that you're trying to resonate, like that can really change everything. And I've told those two people like what they did for me. And a lot of people don't want that power or that credit or that praise. And I've said it to them, like what they saw in me. And they both said the same thing. They're like, you were ready to be seen.
So this is a mini masterclass, right? And I like to string things together for people that are like me, very mostly analytical, but also creative. I feel like what you've shared is, you've had this trajectory kind of on the similar path of storytelling in different mediums, right? You understood at some point that this was a means for you to express deeply what you felt and cared about in the world and what you wanted to elicit from people in the world. And then you needed to do it in a more defined way, i.e. PodPopuli. But also what I love is people saw something in you and you did it, I don't want to say in spite of maybe having reservations that had to do with deep-seated whatever the therapist and the shamanic
it goes
help,
back to
right?
the young child and your parents.
But you push forward. What does that take for people, most of the people, and Beyond the Quo is really a lot of people, Brian, you know this.
Yeah.
Their status quo life is comfortable.
Your yes lives in the land of no. And you've got to shake up your snow globe and get out of your comfort zone. Right. Like I lived most of my life in this sort of emotionally narrow bandwidth, somewhere between not too disappointed and not too, I was sort of content, because anything outside of that was scary to me.
Like simmer.
Yeah. Like too joyful was scared you could get hurt, and I didn't want to go to the other place either. So probably why I never married, I just stayed in this girlfriend, it's fine, it's good, because I was scared to go there. Well, lots of people are scared to go there. We're afraid of being rejected. We're afraid of failing. We're afraid of being hurt. We're afraid of all these things. The answers lie in that place and going to that place. My partner who you've met, Christina, one of the first things she said to me, because I believed in her, and she's like, I'm just a mom from Ohio. And I'm like, first of all, that's offensive to moms in Ohio. Don't just say just. But I go, secondly, I go, you are so much more than that. And then once you see that, or not just see it, be comfortable with the idea, because that is scary to her. That's a life she could understand. And taking on something and running a company and doing all those things to her was forcing her out of a comfort zone in a place where I knew she could flourish, and she's like, well, I could just fall out of the nest.
So you inspired her, is what you're saying.
I believed in her. I think the inspiration had to come from within, but I saw something in her that nobody had ever seen before. And maybe that's because it was time for her to be seen in that way. And maybe it was just, I just did because, fairly recently that had happened to me. And she's like, I know my role. I'm this. I look like this. I act like this. And everybody in her life prior to that was like, this is your role in the world. And I'm like, I think this is not a fulfilling role for you. I think you can go other places. Same with me and same for others. So I've tried to have these conversations with people just like you're doing, going Beyond the Quo, and where else can you go? And we all have second acts in life, especially the women.
For sure.
2/3 of our podcasters here are women. And the best ones and the most dynamic ones and the most entertaining, engaging ones are the ones who are in this sort of second act in life. Either they got out of a marriage or switched jobs or switched careers or did something that was like, there's a new lane of fulfillment besides leading my life the same way for 80 years.
There's this thing called liminal space that I love. And to describe it to people that are more visual and want a better explanation, it's if you are squatting and a chair is beneath you and you hold that squat, it becomes painful after a while. Your legs are shaking,
right.
Your core is effed up. Like you're like, shit, should I sit or should I stand?
Right.
And they're saying, hold it. I feel like the thought of holding that is so painful that people stay seated. The thought of standing up feels awkward because you've never done it before. And so liminal space is horrible. And think about it. We live the same day sometimes over and over again, the same day, while bemoaning the fact that you want something more. And I think your statistic that, I think you said 61% or whatever of the podcasters here are female. I love shit like that. But I do think that a lot of these women, I know for me, I'll speak for myself, are in a liminal space. I think a lot of people in midlife are in a liminal space where maybe our kids are growing up and don't need us anymore. Shit, I didn't even see them off this morning. Do you know what I mean? I didn't even take care of them for dinner. And my marriage is in a situation where we are on the same page. We have a mission for our marriage. We understand where we want to be in 10 years, but that took work. I have a good friends group, but I was in liminal space for at least 10 years before this better version happened. What I love about what you do is you create a space where people that are in liminal, by virtue of even the conversations we're having, sparks ideas for action. There's this book called, I want to say it's Big Dreams. It's by Elizabeth Gilbert. And she talks about ideas being their own entity. And say an idea for you to do this podcast studio, which is cool, came and you diddly-dallied on it and didn't execute on it. Some other person would have gotten that idea because the idea is like, Brian's lazing around on this idea. Yeah. I want to be birthed. Like, what do you say to people that have either good ideas for a podcast or a company or see a spark in someone? It sounds like you had such a big impact on Christina's life, but are kind of sitting in the quo with it and not taking that inspiration, that idea,
I think
birthing it.
I think the biggest thing is, first of all, you have to go for it, which is easier said than done. For sure. You have to risk failure.
Yeah.
But we spend a lot of time focusing on what we know, and we don't really pay attention to what we don't know, because you don't know what you don't know. Yeah. I brought up my book earlier. I don't even tell people to buy or read the book. It's out of print now. And the reason is I thought I knew, so it's a dating book. I thought I had the men's side covered because I was a man. I thought I understood the way men think, and then mostly I focused on the women. I was completely wrong. Touring the world and doing the Great Love Debate, all I knew is what I thought and I experienced, and hearing from hundreds of thousands of other men, I'm like, I'm nothing like. Why? Yeah. Why aren't I sharing the experience? That drove me into therapy too. So understanding, like, I just didn't know what I assumed I know. That's a lot about taking a chance too. Like, let me find out what I don't know, and trying to narrow that as much as possible. And you're never going to narrow all that. Like, that eliminates a lot of the fear. It eliminates a lot of the guesswork. It eliminates a lot of the risk. If you're like, if I can just shrink of what I don't know and add things to what I know, I have a better chance of this working out. And then you do feel more confident in going for it. Yeah.
You're going to remain curious.
Yes. And you need to remain curious in your relationship.
Yeah.
Never stop learning your partner. Never stop asking questions of them and just trying to, like, what were you like in the third grade? I mean, some people, married 20 years, they don't know that.
I recently reconnected with a friend. So I grew up in Trinidad, came here when I was 17, and she was my first friend. And I don't know, found each other on Facebook, and I was going through a rebrand, and they said, reach out to people and say, hey, name 3 things you love about me and 3 things I suck at, whatever. Paraphrasing, of course, to all you branding experts. But it occurred to me that this person had known me the longest outside of my parents and my siblings. I was just going to ask her, and I hadn't spoken to this person in decades, right? So I reached out, and we're friends on Facebook, so she obviously, kind of still involved. And I said, what are the things that stood out to you about me, and how do I appear different now? And she said, like, oh, no, you're the same. And the words that she used specifically made me throw up a little bit because I didn't see myself as that.
Right.
They were words like compassionate, like really nurturing. And I was like, because again, you are like, well, what was my perception of those words? Kind of like what you were just saying, right? You only know what you know. When you wrote that book, you were just like, shit, this is what I know.
I was like, oh, I assume I know this half. I didn't know that half either.
But what about, and I want to go back to relationships. How can people strip down, not literally, and get to the core of who they are so that they go on to do the purpose of their life in a way that I feel like you are doing the work of modeling, being vulnerable, and really showing up about what you did and didn't know and how you've succeeded and floundered and what worked and what didn't work. Even talking about therapy.
Well, yeah.
But you're also challenging us to step outside of.
I mean, yeah. One of the things another thing that somebody said to me that was both a compliment and an insult, and multiple people said this to me, is you should be richer.
Oh, shit.
And you could take that as like, oh my God, how did I screw up? Or you could take that as you have the talent, smarts, ability to do things that are extraordinary.
Yeah.
I take it both ways. I take it as a compliment and insult, and I'm like, you're right. And I've heard that for years. I'm not starving, but part of me is like, and then so saying that, I had to go back and take an inventory of, well, what are the reasons why I why I failed?
Powerful.
And that's same in relationships.
Yes.
What was my role in the relationships not working out? Like, what was my role in this? How did I not communicate the way I needed to? How could I have been a better partner, man, human being in this situation? What was my fears? How much would it have worked out if I'd gone to therapy 20 years earlier? How many times would I be divorced by now if I'd done that? Asking these questions of yourself and going to that place again, I think that helps in all aspects of life.
Yeah. You talked about building a community. How can what you've learned over the past couple of decades, traveling the world, talking about relationships, love, masculine, feminine, all the things, how can that translate into building a community where you can thrive together?
Understanding that just because we're different doesn't mean we're not the same. And a really smart person told me once, I was about to go into a meeting. This is my first agent. And I was about to go into a big meeting at some production company. And he goes to me, are you nervous? And I go, yeah. And he goes, don't worry, nobody knows anything. And I go, what? And he goes, nobody knows anything.
Yeah.
And so that was the most valuable thing anybody had ever said to me, because at most I feel like everybody's maybe one chapter ahead in the book than me.
Yeah.
I was no longer intimidated by somebody who did something or thought something or knew something, experienced something, because I'm like, oh, I'm capable of doing what they're doing. I just haven't had that moment, that experience, the belief in me, something like that. It made me feel like I wasn't that far away from any situation, and I wasn't intimidated anymore. Yeah. And I'm an introvert, huge introvert, believe it or not. Like, I'm terrified of small talk and stuck in an elevator or whatever. Like, give me a crowd of 1,000 people, I'm no problem. That's about control.
Yes.
You can control the conversation when you have the microphone. You can control the conversation being in a situation where that's weird, and you got to get over that too. So you have to understand, like, what are your personality quirks and traits and things, and how can other people, how do they perceive you? How does their perspective matter? And,
And I feel surround yourself with the people that close the gap in what you are comfortable with and not is a strategy that could be underutilized for a lot of people, right?
And you don't, you have to really study yourself. It takes a long time, and I'm still not good at it, to learn how to listen. Like, societally, we're bad listeners. Yeah. And then
as a podcaster, you got to listen to people spout.
And it was a valuable thing to podcast, because you actually have to listen. And a lot of times we listen because we don't listen because we don't care. We don't listen because we don't want to hear something that we might not agree with, or we just are impatient people.
Or all of the above.
Or all of the above. And so these are all things that we are all capable of being better at. We are not finished product. I hear people all the time like, oh, you can't get into a relationship until you're a complete person. Nobody's a complete person.
Nobody.
We're all on a journey. What you're trying to do is find somebody who creates a environment where your confidence can flourish in what you are good and bad and everything, and then you kind of meet in the middle and try and bring each other along for the rest of the ride. Like, you don't need to find we have people who tell, like, I can only date somebody who loves watching The Office. And I'm like, why? Why does that matter to you?
Why does that
Like,
matter?
are you trying to date yourself? I can only date somebody who's a Denver Bronco fan. I can only date somebody who doesn't eat meat. I can, like, all these things, like, you're picking 3 things out of thousands of possible things to do. And what they're really doing is trying to eliminate everything so they don't have to deal with it.
Tell me a little bit. I feel like when I was exploring doing podcasting, I'm a bit of a dork, so I did a lot of research. And what I loved about what you guys did, I think in the summertime, was taught a summer, I don't want to say a workshop for kids.
Camp. Pod camp.
Tell me about the inspiration behind that and what that means to you.
Well, I thought of when I wanted to be a kid, I wanted to be a sportscaster when I grew up. That's what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
Went to college, another thing, had anxiety, didn't want to talk. But I was like, God, would I have loved to podcast at 11.
Right.
And so kids now, they're fearless, they're curious, they're not afraid of either a microphone or a camera, they're not self-conscious, they're not worried if they say 100 times or whatever. So we bring them in and we have a whole week-long process where they create their shows and whatever. And the first thing we do is we sit them down at a table and we host a podcast called Chicken or the Egg. And they all have passionate opinions on one or the
Right.
other. And we go around and the act of them arguing,
Defending their
articulate,
turf.
right,
Yeah.
and they really all have an opinion, lets them understand
Spit
that
and
my
all.
voice can be heard, and some believe in one, and they all have reasons. Why?
Yeah.
And asking them these questions and let them have free-flowing, confident banter really takes the walls. They're like, oh my God, I could host my own show. I like doing this. I want to be right. And they do. And walking them through that is such a good creative experience for them. It gives them communication skills. We have had 4 different podcasters in our community who are autistic children, various degrees.
Yeah.
And the act of putting on the headphones and both the vibrations and the speaking and the getting control of the mic has changed a lot of them off the microphone.
Yeah.
It really has given
could
them
see
sort of
that.
control and confidence, and it's a really good exercise. But
It
the
channels
kids love
their
it.
focus and
Oh my God, we've had kids as young as 7 host podcasts. We've had people as old as 92 host podcasts, and everybody's got a voice.
So for the different generations listening to this, there's so much juice in that, right? There's so much that we can learn from kids, and they are growing up with YouTube. Like, they don't even watch TV anymore, right?
Right. They don't even know.
So
what that is.
I struggle as a mom with parenting now teens, parenting myself differently, right? And I was joking, but not joking, parenting my elder parents right now.
Yeah.
Right? But I think that, and I told my son, he's 14, about this workshop. We found out too late, so I couldn't enroll him. But he was really excited.
He should come in.
And I think lessons for grown-ups is, find some shit that you're excited about.
Yeah.
Get into a container or an ecosystem. You talked about improv. Find something that pushes you out of your little bubble and get uncomfortable with a group that is just as uncomfortable and awkward as you. Let somebody guide you through the process. In your case, you were like chicken and the egg, and then have at it.
Yeah.
And break through some of these stupid things, these limitations that you think you have to be a certain way to show up differently.
Yeah.
Right? I love that.
We had a kid do a podcast about tacos. It was unbelievable. We do one-on-one with kids.
Yeah.
We launch kids, but we do it all the time.
Yeah.
It's one of my favorite things because I put myself back and God, this would have been awesome for me. It would have changed my life.
What parts of storytelling, and I'm saying this because, the story with the autism touches me. My brother, not to compare the two, but my brother has Down syndrome. So our entire life was spent with a frame of reference as to how does this affect him. Yeah. And general population doesn't think like that until it happens to you. And how can something like this, storytelling, being authentic, having shows, and we're trying to inspire somebody to go do more of those shows. I was big into the sandwich generation, supporting and coaching people in the sandwich generation. I still do that, but not as much. But how can people that are in a niche or a unique subsection of the population pursue something like this because of the richness of thought, perspectives, resources, community building that could be possible, but just by using their voice and a platform like this?
I think everybody's got something to say, and it goes back to those two things I said earlier. Once you understand or try and hone down on what are you passionate about and what are you curious about, that's going to drive everything. That is the intersection where a good podcast is found. That is an intersection where the curiosity, the conversation can be found. Passion and curiosity. So if these are things you want to talk about, I guarantee you, no matter how niche it is that you want to talk about, we got a podcast who just talks about bacon, and we have a podcast.
Just bacon.
It's called The Sizzle, and we have a podcast by a school bus driver. It's called Big Yellow Podcast. There are 50,000 people around the world, and the world's a smaller place now, that think and care and want to talk about exactly the same things you do.
Yeah.
So you're not the only one who thinks this way and feels this way, and there's a community of them somewhere, and our job here is to cast the net out and try and reel those people in. And like I said, the fact that you're having those conversations, they want to be a part of that conversation. Even if it's just by listening, you are a part of the conversation. So,
complete different topic. Do you believe, I know the great love debate, we started off talking a lot about, do you believe in love?
Oh, no doubt. Now, I think in order to believe in it, you have to define it for yourself. Like, what does that mean? We throw that word around a lot. Like, I love pizza and I love the New York Mets, and we say it a lot. But romantic love, you have to define what that is or what that looks like, because then you can find it. And if you don't really know, I'll know when I see it. I don't know about that. You have to know, like, how do you know you are in love? And so I ask people to define it for themselves. And my personal definition, that doesn't work for everybody, but it works for me, is when there's nothing I'm doing that I wouldn't rather be doing with her. It doesn't mean I have to do it with her. It means I'd rather. And that's about wanting to share and wanting her to be a part of it and wanting to, like, make a world. Like, if I have that, I love her. And so I obviously believe in that because I've had that and I find that and whatever. I think a lot of people, you brought up COVID earlier, really check themselves out of society because there's a lot more ways that we can entertain and engage and stimulate than ever before without another person. It's not as good. And a lot of people realize that too. A lot of people that I would meet in the Great Love Debate would be like, you know what, I'm just going to watch Netflix and my dog and it's better. Well, a lot of people for a year and a half or 2 years got to see what that looks like. It's not better. And they do miss even that nervous interaction, and they do miss that hope and all that. So love is rooted in hope and possibilities, and I absolutely believe in those things,
I like the concept of ebb and flow in love. I feel like I'm equipped 2 decades in, but a part of it is I don't think that we can give each other the same amount of support, love, whatever, at the same time if we're going through different seasons of life. Whether I had a hysterectomy last year or he had a death in his family. And I think that for me, the most pivotal thing that I had to learn, and again in my 40s, was the reckoning of, do I love myself? And then if there are parts of me that I felt it was inadequate, that I was looking for somebody to compensate for, and I didn't even know it, how do I heal, restore, replenish, power up those parts of me so that I'm coming to him and whoever else I'm interacting with as a full and whole person without you needing to fill something in me or give me something to make me happy. And until that's my secret sauce, and that's a lot of what I share in the world, I could not find what it is I was looking for because it existed in me and I wasn't, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I agree. I ask people all the time, what do you need to be happy? And the list of what makes them unhappy is right there.
My God,
it is ready to go because they've spent a lot more time thinking about it, obsessing about it, and they haven't. Well, if you don't know what makes you happy, how am I supposed to know?
Yeah, they rolled it out like a scroll.
Right, and I know. So you need to understand yourself so you can put that out to the world. This is what I need to be happy. I love candy. Can you give me candy? But if you're constantly being like, I don't like this, and people do that in dating profiles. They lead with the don't contact me if this, not this. All I know is the negative. there's not enough positivity. There's not enough positivity towards each other. There's not enough positivity towards ourselves. We're really hard on ourselves. We have to stop that. And you know, like I said, my old producer used to say the words, there's magic in maybe. And what that means is that if you're willing to go to a place of the unknown and you're not quite sure, that there's magic there. And a lot of people aren't willing to do that.
So many good nuggets. Brian, thank you so much for hopping on. I was nervous to talk to you because I'm like, oh man, this guy's done like hundreds of podcasts, has his own podcast. And we were, you know, talking last night, and what you said earlier about we're all similar, and you have the same lived experiences, right? You get up and your hair's messy, and you're traveling and dealing with airport irritations, and you know. And in my mind, I think that the thing that sustains me in the work that I do is that if I can get to the point where we have the shared common experiences, like we just talked about, I think, not to be corny, but the world will be a better place.
It would. I travel a lot of places in the world where people seem legitimately happy.
Sure.
I don't see nearly as much of that here because people are focused too much on everybody else.
Yeah.
What do they have?
And meanwhile, everybody's focused on their own selves.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
People need to.
One of my favorite quotes is, "Your opinion of me is none of my business."
I agree. That's a good quote. I like that. Yeah, I agree with you.
All right. So thank you so much, Brian, again, for sharing your insights, your leadership journey, and your heart with us today. I deeply appreciate it.
Thank you. This was fun.
Awesome. To our listeners, if you enjoyed this episode, please don't forget to subscribe, leave me a review, share it with someone that needs to hear this. And you can connect with Brian, you know.
GreatLoveDebate.com.
Awesome. And remember, you've already done the quo. It's time to go beyond. Thanks for listening. I'll see you next week.